Well, this is a tremendous honor, and I really appreciate the introduction. And I just have one minor pedantic correction to make. I unfortunately was not invited to teach at the University of Kentucky.
Oh.
But Duke University did step forward, and so that was very nice of them. But I hope that one day the University of Kentucky will invite me to come in and do something or speak there or what have you. But again, really great to be here. I thank everyone for your interest, and I want to thank Professor McLaren once again, Professor Campbell, and Jacqueline for helping to arrange my visit here today and tomorrow. And we had a great evening last night at supper at MTK, or is it MKT? On Metcalf. But in any event, it was very good, and you can see that I probably had too much wine, because I don't remember if it was MTK. But I think I've fully recovered now. I should read for half an hour, is that?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So black ink for black liberation. Absolutely. And I would like to think, I'd like to make that claim that I have tried in some ways to represent that notion, to be true to that idea of liberation in some way, shape, or form. In lieu of a total socialist transformation of our society, I have to make do with writing poetry, and hoping that I can influence and entertain folks at the same time, and maybe do a little bit of accidental teaching. So, all right, I finally found what it is I'd like to begin with, and actually it's a couple of poems from Wildwood Falls, and the first poem I'd like to read is. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to start with those two poems. I'm going to start with this poem titled Watercolor for Negro Expatriates in France, which is a poem I wrote New Year's Eve 1978 into New Year's Day 1979. It's the poem, for me, that said that I could be a poet. I might think of myself as being a poet. 18 going on 19. So this poem was very important for me. And it also, looking back on it now, I recognize that it was an early attempt for me to think through the idea of an African-Canadian perspective. I was heavily and properly influenced by African-American literature, and I'm really happy about that, really proud of that. A black kid from Nova Scotia, or was a black kid from Nova Scotia, downtown Halifax, inner city, I read my Margaret Atwood, and I read my George Grant, and I read so many other great Canadian writers and thinkers, but the writers who made sense for me in terms of my own lived experience in Nova Scotia were African-American authors. When I began to read their works, I thought, oh, okay, now I understand my predicament. Now I know where I am. And I can still go back to the Canadian authors for a sense of landscape and seascape and relationships in terms of connections to geography again, and of course the history. But it was really understanding the urban environment especially, and the history of slavery that took me to African-American creativity, culture in general, and of course the music, which is also very important for me as a youth growing up. And one more thing about this. When I sat down to write this poem, Watercolor for Negro Expatriates in France, I ended up writing a work that was actually critical of African Americans. Because I was thinking to myself, how could you have run away from the struggle in the United States? You great black artists and writers and thinkers, and so forth, James Baldwin and Richard Wright, and Josephine Baker, and so on. How could you have left the United States and left your brethren and sistren to fend for themselves against the racism that was ongoing there and very directly evident in the 1920s, 1930s, which is the period that this poem deals with. So actually, I think I can describe it as being an African-Canadian critique of African-American artists and writers and thinkers, but it also comes mixed with a lot of envy. Because I wanted myself, as an 18-year-old, going on 19-year-old, to be in Paris and drinking that wine. And I was really jealous that they got to do it, and I was sitting in 3 Mile Plains, Nova Scotia, in my grandmother's kitchen, writing this poem. Anyway, watercolor for Negro expatriates in France. What are calendars to you, and indeed, what are atlases? Time is cool jazz in Bretagne, you hidden in berets or eccentric scarves, somewhere over the rainbow, where you are tin men requiring hearts, lion men demanding courage, scarecrow men needing minds all your own after Du Bois made blackness respectable. Geography is brown girls in Paris in the spring by the restless Seine, flowing like blood in chic African colonies. Josephine Baker on your bebop phonographs in the lonely, brave old rented rooms. Gallic wines shocking you out of yourselves, leaving you as abandoned as obsolete locomotives whimpering lead-belly blues in lonesome shantytown, USA. What are borders, frontiers to you? In actual 7-league sandals you ride Monet's shimmering water lilies in your street artist imaginations. Across the sky, darkened here and there by Nazi shadows, croup thunderclouds, and in other places by Americans who remind you that you are niggers, even if you have read Victor Hugo. Night is winged Ethiopia in the distance, rising on zeta beams of radio-free Europe, bringing you in for touchdown at Orleans, or to strange strychnine street blockers, fleecing you for an authentic Negro poem, or rhythm and blues salutation. This is your life, lounging with Richard Wright in Matisse Green Parks, facing nightmares of contorted lynchers every night, every night. Scatological ragtime reggae haunts the caverns of La Metro. You pick up English language newspapers and Time magazines. Learn that this one was arrested, that one assassinated. Fear winking like Gregor Samsa in the hands of a mob. Lust for a black Constance Chatterley, not even knowing that all black people not residing in Africa are kidnapped victims. After all, how can you be an expatriate of a country that was never yours? Pastel paintings on Paris pavement, wall posters, Beardsley styled. You pause and admire them all. And France entrances you with its kaleidoscope cafes, chain-smoking intelligentsia, absinthe and Pernod poets. Have you ever seen postcards of Alabama or Auschwitz, Mussolini or Mississippi? It is unsafe to wallow in Ulyssean dreams, genetic theories, vignettes of Gertrude Stein, Hemingway, other maudlin moderns, while the godless globe detonates its war heart, loosing goose-stepping geniuses and dark secret labs. Perhaps I suffer aphasia. I know not how to talk to you. I send you greetings from Afrique and spirituals of Catholic negritude. Meanwhile, roses burst like red stars. A flower explodes for a special sister. You do not accept gravity in France, where everything floats on the premise that the earth will rise to meet it the next day, where the Eiffel Tower bends over backwards to insult the Statue of Liberty, and a woman in the flesh of the moment sprouts rainbow butterfly wings and kisses a schizoid sculptor lightly on his full ruby lips, and an argument is dropped over cocoa by manic mulatto musicians who hear whispers of Elliott or Ellington in common prayers. You have heard Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith. You need no passports. Your ticket is an all-night room facing the ivory voodoo moon full of Henri Rousseau, lions and natives, and your senses inexplicably homing in on gorgeous Ethiopia, while Roman rumors of war fly you home. And I'm going to segue from that into a couple of poems from Willa Falls, beginning with Look Homeward, Exile. And it's an appropriate segue because, as I mentioned earlier, I was a little bit envious of all these African Americans who got to tool around Europe and enjoy all the cuisine and the wine and so forth, and hang out with Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and listen to their Miles Davis and those left bank cafes and so on. I know, it's a cartoon and so on, but it was important for me as a youth in Nova Scotia, in Halifax especially, to have that dream. And I'm thinking of James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room as well, which I read many times as a teen. So here's a partial response to all that. I finally got to Europe, finally left North America for the first time when I was 25, 1985, and I went to several cities, London, which I did not like, and Paris, which I liked very much, and Amsterdam, which I adored, and was in a laundromat in Amsterdam, watching my clothes spin around in the dryer while sipping a raspberry milkshake from McGill. And so that got me thinking about back home, Nova Scotia, and 3 Mile Plains, my mother's home community, and that's where this poem originates. Look homeward, exile. I can still see that soil crimsoned by butchered hog and imbrued with rye, lie, and homely spirituals everybody must know. Still dream of folks who broke or cracked like shale. Pushkin, who twisted his hands in boxing. Morocco, who ran girls like dogs and got stabbed. Lavinia, her teeth decayed to black stumps, her lovemaking still in demand, spitting black phlegm. Her pension after 20 talents. And Tooth, suckled on anger that no Baptist church could contain, who let wrinkled Ely seed her moist womb when she was just 13. And the tyrant son that reared from barbed wires being flamed that charred the idiot crops to depression and hurt my granddaddy to bottle after bottle of sweet death. His dreams beaten to one tremendous pulp until his heart seized and choked. His love gave out. But beauty survived, secreted in freight trains snorting in their pins. In babes whose faces were cold black mirrors and strange drummers of stroke and banjos, hung blind blues, precise, ornate, rich needlepoint. In my love's dark orient skin that smelled like orange peels and tasted like rum. Good God, I remember my creator in the old ways. I sit in taverns and stare at my fists. I knead earth into bread, spell water into wine, still nothing warms my wintry exile. Neither prayers nor fine love, neither votes nor hard drink, for nothing heals those saints felled in green beds by love or pain, a screw jammed in thick, straining wood. There I was enjoying the idea of some kind of exile. All the way from 3 Mile Plains and Halifax, and so on, the romance of it all. To be in Amsterdam, in a laundromat, and think about all those folks back then and back there and all that. But anyway, I want to follow up with a more down-to-earth poem, which is also in Wild Falls, which is titled The Wisdom of Shelley. And in this poem, I have a character whose name is Shelley. And she is responding to the courtship, very poetic and very flowery, of the overly romantic ex, short for Xavier, who is trying to court her, and she doesn't trust him. And so I tried to write this poem in the voices of the folks that I knew in Black Nova Scotia, Africadia, rural Nova Scotia, and specifically the Annapolis Valley, where I got to be a bad social worker for 1 year. 1985 to 1986. I was a bad social, I don't mind admitting it, I was bad. They put me in there to do social work and all I had was an honors BA in English. How on earth am I going to do any kind of effective social work? Well, guess what? It meant I was able to record stories. It meant I could listen to the dramas that people had to tell me in their own tongues about their daily experiences as working class and poor, marginalized, police harassed, young and old for that matter, Africadians, African Nova Scotians, Dessouche, I'll say, add very quickly, whose roots go back a couple hundred years. So I tried to write this poem with that notion in mind. The wisdom of Shelley in Shelley's voice. You come down after 5 winters, ex, bristling with roses and words, 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 brazen as brass. Like a late blizzard you bust in our door, talking April and snow and rain, littering the table with poems, as if we could trust them. I can't. I heard Pa tell Ma how much and much he loved her. And I saw his fist fall so gracefully against her cheek. She swooned. Roses got thorns, and words do lie. I've seen love die. So, as I like to joke, no sugar for X. But that's okay, Shelley has sisters. And so one of them is another character named Sela. And X finds himself able to find a rapprochement with Sela. And it's set in the 1930s, which gave me an opportunity to throw in some blues lyrics. So keeping in mind that I can't sing, although I have a story to tell you about that. So I can't sing, so I'm not going to try and sing it. I will say that I wrote this also when I was 19. King Bee Blues is the title of this poem, also in Wildlife Falls. And it's about X and his courtship of Sela, his lust for her, his desire for her, and so on. But anyway, here it is. I'm an old king bee honey, buzzing from flower to flower. I'm an old king bee sweets, humming from flower to flower. Women got good pollen, I get some every hour. There's lily in the valley, and sweet honeysuckle rose too. There's lily in the valley, and sweet honeysuckle rose too. And there's pretty black-eyed Susan, perfect as the night is blue. Now, you don't have to trust a single black word I say. Now, you don't have to trust a single black word I say. But don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. But don't be surprised if. Don't be surprised if. Don't be surprised if I sting your flower today. So, it's 1930s stuff, so don't blame me, and so on. I got to keep an eye on the time, and of course, we can talk about the poetry of the blues. It is very raunchy, like rap can be now. R&B was much more playful around sexuality and so on. Blues and rap, I think, tend to be a little bit more direct, even though still using a lot of imagery and euphemisms and metaphors and so on. I think the blues performers were just a lot more direct. So, and as I continue to think about this theme of my presentation, Black Ink and Black Liberation, I do think that the music and the lyrics to the music are just as important a form of commonly held literature or orature, to use a more effective term, for understanding the predicaments of racism, sexism, classism, and responding to them. And of course, some of us were talking about Angela Davis last night, who of course is a great scholar on women and the blues, as well as the prison industrial complex. And of course, this is all interrelated. So I like to think that, or argue, or suggest simply that writing blues poems is still revolutionary, or liberationist to a certain extent. But I immediately follow up on that with another more or less playful poem, which is Haligonian Market Cry, which is from my collection Execution Poems. And I did include this poem as a little bit of comic relief in the midst of a collection which tells the true story, highly fictionalized, but still the true story of my two second cousins, they were my mom's first cousins, so my second cousins, George and Rufus Hamilton, who were hanged in New Brunswick, July 27, 1949, for their murder and robbery of a taxi driver The crime occurred January 7 into January 8 of 1949. The brothers were apprehended a few days later, really mainly because George Hamilton had a guilty conscience and went to the RCMP and said, "My brother did it." At which point, both of them were taken into custody and put on trial for their lives. Although George testified for the Crown against his brother, and there's evidence to support his contention that he was not in the taxi cab when the fatal blows were struck. Even though there was evidence to support that, it didn't really cause the jury, which for the record was all white and all men, so anyway, but that's par for the course. It is 1949, it is Fredericton, one might not expect anything different, and they were probably not predisposed to exercise or suggest a whole lot of mercy for either of the brothers. So they were hanged back to back in the early hours of July 27, 49. While a mob of 10,000 people filled the streets of Fredericton. It's still a relatively small city. It was an even smaller city then. So this is basically almost the whole town coming out, or city coming out, 3 a.m. in the morning to witness and audit whatever they could of this process of justice being done. And we can talk about the legalities and so on and so forth. Technically, and I won't get into all that now, but maybe if someone has a question about it, I can explain better. Technically, George, at least George, might have been spared the noose, technically. Although the way the law was interpreted back in 1949, it was appropriate for the judge in the case to say, Mr. Justice Michaud, to say, hey, both these guys are equally guilty and both deserve to be hanged. Anyway, that's what happened. Some members, local members of the Ku Klux Klan also showed up, just to add some color to the proceedings and so on. The executions took place in a barn behind the Fredericton City Jail, which still exists. The jail still exists, the barn is long gone, but the jail does still exist. And it's now a science museum. Although for school kids to visit, do science experiments and so on. But in the basement, there is a little actual museum for the most notorious criminals who've ever spent time in Fredericton City Jail. And so there's a little, I shouldn't call it a shrine, but there's a little testament to the presence of my second cousins in that prison on death row, which is in the basement, for crying out loud, just to be dramatic. And Alan Legier, who was the madman of the Miramichi, also spent time in Fredericton City Jail. He also has his own little shrine to recognize his misdeeds and crimes, simply put. And then you have a piece of the rope that they say, legend says, was used in the hangings. But in any event, I only visited that site once, and at one point I was invited to stand in the cell where one of the brothers was held, and I did. But I also felt I should tell the guy, don't you dare close that cell door while I'm standing here. Don't you dare do that. Anyway, after all that build-up about the gravitas and seriousness of that crime and the fact it was a deep, buried family secret for many years, well, 45 years. I was 34 in 1994 when my unfortunately now late mom mentioned to me while we were having toast and tea in a kitchen in Halifax that, oh, you had two cousins who were hanged. What? You know, I was slurping out my, blurting out my tea at the same time. What? Right? And so that's how I found out about it. And then I went around and asked, she was 10 at the time it happened. I went around and asked all of my aunts and uncles and cousins, older of course. And as soon as I started to ask questions, everybody wanted to tell me about this case. Everybody. No one held back anything. I got a lot of legends too, which I worked into my novel, George and Rue. Everyone. I went to Fredericton and interviewed people, members of the Salvation Army that George became a member of in his last months. Researchers into the death penalty who were very interested in this particular case. I got to meet and talk with us as well. So it was just a lot of information gathering and very important for me to take on that case because I could, and myself, try to understand and feel that I did understand, maybe only a little bit, of the alienation, marginalization, racist harassment and exploitation that these two brothers experienced. They were born in 1925, 1926. They were only 22 and 23 when they were executed. They had hardly had time to even begin their lives when they committed the crimes that caused them to lose their lives. But anyway, I'm going to finish with all this build-up and just read the actually comic poem that I included in execution poems, just again as some kind of comic relief. But it is also based on my memories of the Halifax marketplace in the 1960s, and I was a boy growing up there, and all the different languages and voices that one might hear. So here it is, Haligonian market cry. I got hallelujah watermelons, virginal pears, virtuous corn, Munich Hague Altera Winket, luscious fat ass watermelons, plump pears, big butt corn, Lagusta Esterhardine, come and get it, cucumbers, hot to trot, lost fresh cucumbers, voulez-vous coucher avec moi? Watermelons, go to church and get redeemed, watermelons, oh peccatori in veritas, good God, cucumbers, righteous pears, golden Baptist corn, die Ruhes Doctor, I like to cough, I got sluttish watermelons, sinful cucumbers, jailbait pears, planted by big mouth Chaucer and picked by evil Shakespeare. Having read something humorous, I should read something serious from execution poems. And so I will, and then I promised Professor McLaren that I'll read my poem about the burning of the library in Alexandria. So I'm going to hope that I have time to do that. So the serious poem is The Killing. And so I imagine Rufus and George having committed this crime and then discussing it in the aftermath. And I deliberately give Rufus very elevated language. And it is true that in terms of the actual Rufus or Root Hamilton, even though he, like his brother, had only grade 3, which is typical actually for many blacks in Nova Scotia in the 20s, right up to the 1960s actually, to have grade 3, and the most would be grade 6. If they got even that far, it would be grade 6. But in any event, I deliberately wanted to give Rufus this elevated language because I was connecting him very much to the great villain, Moorish villain in Titus Andronicus. So I wanted to borrow from that characterization. So Rufus, I ingratiated the grinning hammer with Silver's not friendless, not unfriendly skull. Behind him, like a piece of storm, I unleashed a frozen glinting, a lethal gash of lightning. His soul leaped from him in a red sea, a dead sea, churning his clothes to lava. George, no, it didn't look like real blood, it was something more like coal that inched from his mouth. Rude. It was a cold hit in the head. A hurt, unmassageable car seat left stinking of gas and metal and blood, and reddening violently. A rhymeless poetry scrawled his obituary. George, it was coming on us for a while, this here misery. We all split a beer before iron split Silver's skull. Silver's muscles still soft and tender. That liquor killed him. The blood like shadow on his face, his caved-in face. Smell of his blood over everything. Rude. Iron smell of a hammer mingled with iron smell of blood and a chrome smell of snow and moonlight. George, he had $200 in him, bootlegging him. We had a hammer on us, a spoonful of cold beer in us. The taxi driver lies red in the alabaster snow. His skeleton is taken sick and must be placed in the ground. This murder is 100% dirt of our hands. Rude. Twitchy. My hand was twitchy inside my jacket. The hammer was gravity. Everything else was jumpy. I wondered if Silver could hear his own blood thundering, vermilion in his temples quick and twitchy because of beer, jumpy molecules infecting his corpuscles already nervous. The hammer went in so far that there was no sound, just the slight mushy squeak of bone. Silver swooned like the leaden Titanic. Blood screamed down his petty bourgeois clothes. George, can we cover up a murder with snow, with white frosty roses? Rude. Here's how I justify my error. The blow that slew Silver came from 2 centuries back. It took that much time and agony to turn a white man's whip into a black man's hammer. George, no, we needed money, so you hit the so-and-so, only much too hard. Now what? Rufus, so what? And do I have time still?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is, I was appointed Poet Laureate, Parliamentary Poet Laureate of Canada, January 1, 1916. So I was introduced to parliamentarians in that capacity in early February 1916. And I spent part of my time on that day of my introduction to the House of Commons in the Library of Parliament. And because I was in the Library of Parliament, I thought I should write a poem about the burning of the library in Alexandria. So here it is, Alexandria, a Light, which is also available in this book in French, translated by Robert Pequin, with whom I worked a great deal in that position. Sunshine charred to smoke, saith Plutarch of the Tsar. Julius Caesar exhibited syphilitic blindness, refused to recognize beauty as justice or justice as beauty. And as at Alexandria, Egypt, 48 BCE, that untimed time, in his push to dethrone Ptolemy, to rout the obstreperous Egyptians, and so he waxed incendiary. The gypsies were so havocing his sails, so disrupting his sea-borne siege. Caesar fretted that his patchwork armada would fritter into tatters, become cracked open carcasses, mass floating coffins, his sailors bloated like rats dead in the drift, or looked bedraggled rats clinging to splinters. Caesar scrupled not to skipper but to scupper his vessels. That impenetrable, unreachable egotist wagered on letting his seamen burn alive the stars, set flames jetting along ropes, set flames streaking meteoric through rigging, so that his stagnant heart would stay the turbulent dismay that is defeat. Drastic scowls shattered his face. Better to arson his navy, make smoking, fiery, unholy funerals of his fleet, char waterlogged wood to charcoal chips, so that each burning boat resembled conniving dandelions. Caesar's ships were soon floating fires intended to render Egyptians ash, swamp their soldiery in blaze, smash their machines to sparks and cinders. Once awash in salt spray and foam, Roman sailors now pinpointed helpful breezes, placed their torches, and were soon awash in ash. But Caesar's commands, rolling off his tongue like water off his back, showed him a debauched, prima facie arsonist, so eager to bitch at and pitch down Ptolemy, so eager to have the Egyptian perish with the taste of disgust in his mouth, to know miserable, dreadful humiliation, to be humbled, then tumbled into a grave beneath a pyramid of cadavers. Caesar needed not just ruins, but gore. He ordered that any sailor jumping ship without first setting it alight would land, spitted by swords. Now the Roman navy was blazing, drifting, and so soon had the city waterfront, all its docks, wharves, piers equally burning with stomach-churning effect. Each blazed galley was a luminous contaminant. Sparks rolled waves of superheated air. Cinders took flight too. These miniature torches rained on the port. The harbor witnessed birthing fires, galleons aflame, looking massively imposing as pyramids, but pyramids imploding, dismantling once calm water, singeing even the sea. and the irregular and flesh-eating arson-made lime-white bones of soot-blackened bodies. Thus the flooding fire swallowed up the dockyards, then chugged and charged, churning through all of Ptolemy's palaces, shaming the abashed architecture into ruins. Shortly, the kindled lightning of Caesar's smoking hulks, his marine-born 37th Legion, that melange of roaring bees, incinerated the great library, liquidating 40,000 scrolls, account books, ledgers, histories, theologies, poetry, all gone to smog and smut, all teased to smithereens and tatters. What was lost? Books good to prop up unbalanced kingdoms or teeter-totter marriages or lopsided tables. Eventually, rainbows soothed the sea, but Alexandria's great library was empurpled, charring, songs gone to cinders, poems gone to pulp, philosophy gone to unpardonable swill. Even theology, gods, got dragged through garbage, worm-chewed garbage. Imagine Osiris half-burnt, his gilt-faced singed. Caesar's chronicle triumph, his capture of Alexandria, was regression. To exterminate the library, to set parchment smoking robustly, pages blackening unrelentingly, while cheering with wine the aching stories of Egyptian groans, enacted a masterpiece of immorality. Such constant history is our dispiriting inheritance, but words still throng into song, thrive, and thus meet eternity alive. Dante's glittering ink pards up, or Leighton's crowing lungs, or Delisso's plumes of letters, all arrive as impotent as sparks, or as lighthouse beams that silver the wrecks of inglorious tyrants, and the seaweed graves of sunken assassins and arsonists, to tell us liberty is priceless, not gold, that the poet enters a pantheon of equals, the perennial pinnacles, emissaries of wine, that their great strumming is fire that never dies down, that encumbers otherwise unencumbered darkness. And now it's time for
Great. Thank you very much.